Give us this day our daily bread.
Behold the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world.
Drew, what you doing?
As we begin this reflection on the second journey of learning to love others, let's go back to the beginning and say that the most important part of this is anything God asks us to do, it's because He's leading us to happiness. He's not trying to control us. And I don't think we can say that enough, because the more we realize we're being invited to become our best self and invited to become happier and freer, the more we are open to the grace of God and the call of God to stay on that journey. So this particular journey really addresses an area that is very prevalent in many people's lives and is very prevalent in our country right now. And that's the whole problem of anger. That anger, revenge, holding a grudge, refusing to forgive, harshness, all of those kinds of things not only make the person at whom we're angry miserable, they make us miserable. You know, anytime we're angry constantly and stewing around with one of these long-going angers, it just eats at us. And God is saying to us, you know, let me lead you away from that. I'm trying to lead you to happiness, not anger. So this second reflection on this second journey is from hostility to hospitality. And again, those are Henry Nouwen's words, and I want to give him credit for that. When I first read that learning to love others is hostility to hospitality, I don't know that I appreciated it like I do today. But because there is so much hostility in the country, in the church sometimes, in so many people's lives. And again, as we said earlier, part of it's connected to the pace we're living. The pace we're living makes us anxious and hostile and impatient. We're hollering at the driver in the car in front of us. I've always said, if at the last judgment I'm judged by my behavior in the car, ooh. But I don't think I'm the only one in danger there. I think lots of us say things in the car and holler at the windshield that we probably shouldn't. But the more I see the hostility, the more I realize what Father Nouwen was talking about in those books. That, yeah, it is a movement away from there, because one of the biggest causes and blocks to loving people is that fear in us. And then when you talk about the other end of the journey is hospitality. Hospitality is obviously much more than just having the right place setting and the right napkins. It's hospitality is making room in my life for other people. So it isn't always my agenda, my schedule, my needs, what I want to do next. And again, that's connected to the pace. You know, if the pace of life, which is so immoral and is keeping us from being our best self, you know, we run so fast we don't have room in our life for others. Where if if we have a Sunday where we're doing nothing and can invite people over and can let families get together and let friends share time with each other, that making room in our life is so crucial. Well, let's talk about some of those causes of the hostility. If we start with the one, fear, so much hostility is based on fear. And all we have to do is look at our country in the last 2 or 3 years. The fears in Ferguson, the fears between policemen and black people, and who's being judged and what's going to happen to young people. And everybody is frightened. The policemen are frightened because they have wives and kids at home. The young blacks are told by their parents, even though they're the nicest, politest kids, if you are stopped, keep your hands up on the steering wheel. Make sure that your hands are up there. Make sure that everybody knows that you're polite. Answer the question. If you're going to ask for your wallet, ask the officer if you have permission to reach for your wallet. And they have to teach their kids that, because that fear of each other is so much a part of our society right now. It's certainly part of the whole immigrant question. And it's not simply, are some immigrants going to come and not be checked out well enough and become a threat to people in our country. Sometimes it's just a fear of, are they going to take our jobs? Are they going to take my job? Are they going to upset things? Sometimes the fear, is not just based on a prejudice. It isn't a prejudice sometimes about color. That if a person says, well, there's a black family is going to move next to us in our white neighborhood. If it's a black dentist and he's educated and his kids seem to be nice kids, nobody cares one way or another. Nobody has a problem. But the first time that a family moves in where the teenage boys have their pants halfway down their butt and dreadlocks and you don't know what's coming next, all of a sudden there's fear. They may be the nicest kids in the world, just with it, or as they see it, being with it. But it's frightening. Is this going to change my neighborhood? Is something happening in my neighborhood? So all of these things keep us from that journey of learning to love others. The journey to love other people has a lot of different dimensions to it. The journey to love ourselves, well, we're just dealing with ourselves. But the journey to love others, there's a whole group of people. The first ones are the people closest to us. Learning to love our own family members. And you can say, well, no, that's a natural love. Yeah, it is, but the people closest to us, we give the power to those people to hurt us. And parents can say hurtful things. Children can say hurtful things. Brothers and sisters can say hurtful things. Families that are supposed to get together for Christmas, somebody says something misunderstood at a funeral, at Christmas, wherever it might be. And we give the people closest to us the power to hurt us. So learning to love those around us means the ability to accept different styles, different ways of living. Where it really comes up sometimes is with a death in the family, that certain people think that everybody in the family has to grieve the same way, or they're not grieving. No, that's not true. You know, when we're grieving, some people can't stop crying. Some can't cry at all. Some can't stop talking about the person who died. Some can't talk about it at all. Just like we walk differently and think differently and eat differently, we grieve differently. And those things annoy each other. So sometimes that journey of moving from hostility to hospitality is welcoming different styles into our life, different ways of doing things, different ways of thinking. And then within families, we've got that interesting phenomenon called adolescence. And I tease the adolescents themselves, so I'm not saying something to you I haven't said to them, that adolescence is a form of mental illness. You just outgrow it. You can outgrow it. But those years, there's lots of war in the house. One wonderful man in our parish told me something wonderful one time. He said, I have two boys, and they were both 13, 14, right together. And he said, I told them, he said, look, for the next 6 years, we're going to be at war. We're not going to like each other. We're not going to say good things to each other. We're going to have trouble with each other. We're going to holler at each other. But I tell you, my sons, in 6 years, I will be there. I will be there for you. That is a loving statement and a realistic statement. Let's talk about another group. Learning to love people who are different than we are. And each one of us will have different areas that we tolerate well or don't. One person has a real problem with people of a different color. Another person says, no, that's not a problem to me. That's a skin color. What are they like inside? Who is it? Other people have problems with people of a different religion. And we're moving away from that, but it's still around. It still causes grief in some families. Another area that is very touchy for a lot of people is people with a different sexual orientation. People who are straight have a real trouble trying to understand what is this being gay business. And because there was such a stigma for so long that this was a choice, and it was a perverted choice, and that something's wrong with them, it takes a long time. And many men, for instance, who have a little suspicion that there might be something in them that's not quite on that scale of heterosexual to homosexual, that there's something in them they're not so comfortable with, become very homophobic and get very upset. Usually the men who are most upset with gay men are wondering what's going on inside of them, and they're threatened by it. In all of these areas, and sometimes it's none of those, it's just a foreigner, someone who comes from a different country, someone who has a different look, a different custom, a different way of cooking, a different music they want to listen to. And that's a trouble for me. When I'm at a stoplight and the guy next door has his radio where his window's closed, my window's closed, but it's too loud for me, and I'm not even in his car, and he's listening to whatever kind of rap is going on, I have to do everything to say, Bill, wait for the light to change and it'll go away. But all of us have areas, all of us have pockets of our life where we don't deal with people who are different. Well, the challenge of this particular spiritual journey, love your neighbor as yourself, that challenge and invitation of Jesus is different for all of us. And each of us has to keep saying, where are those pockets where Jesus' message hasn't gotten yet, where I haven't let him in? I think I'm open-minded to a point. And then, as long as we hear the challenge, we're in good shape. One of the others is the challenge of that I would call love in action, and that's social justice. Really committing ourselves as a church and as individuals to social justice is very difficult. It's difficult for a lot of reasons. One of the differences and difficulties is social justice sometimes gets mixed up with our politics. You know, are liberals more for social justice than conservatives? Well, not necessarily. There's just a different way of dealing with different problems. But that's only one, that it gets mixed up in our politics. But one of the other areas where in that journey of moving toward loving others is the problem of just kind of the cynicism when you work with the poor, because the poor are not always so grateful. The poor are not always so open. Sometimes they're double dipping. Sometimes they're using the system. And we have to know that. Our job is to love and help. Our job is to try our best to be responsible with our money or the money in which we are entrusted as we help people. But there's a cynicism can get into there that says, I'm just being taken and they're making a fool out of me. I have to say, as a priest, when people come to my door on a Sunday afternoon at 12:30, and their mother is dying in Philadelphia again, because their mother has died in Philadelphia about 8 times before, but they don't remember that I remember their face. And they're traveling from Denver, and they only need $30 for gas to get here, and maybe 20 more for some food for tonight. You know, after enough Sunday afternoons of listening to people going to their mother's funeral, they must do nothing in Philadelphia but bury people, because almost every one of them is burying a grandmother or a mother in Philadelphia. So don't go to Philadelphia. It's a dangerous place. You're liable to die. But that cynicism gets in there, and it blocks us. The more we know that, and the more we name that, and the more we see it in ourselves, all right, we can say, all right, I need to challenge that in me, but have to just name that it's there. But the poor, the outcast, the immigrant, reaching out to them, not letting the poor be the enemy. And there are a lot of people who want to paint the poor as an enemy. All we have to do is go back to Matthew's depiction of the Last Judgment. You know, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. And we know that whole story, that beautiful picture of Jesus there on the bread line, being helped by somebody at a soup kitchen. And with that whole story, that's how we're going to be judged. Have we made that journey? So wherever it is on that journey, whether it's learning to love the people in our own household, whether it's learning to love the people who are different than we are, whether it's learning to love the poor and the outcast and do the works of justice, or whether it's this last one of learning to love our enemies. Because that's the most important. And if we need any sign of the unhappiness when we live our life with anger and revenge, look at the Middle East. Look at the Middle East over the last thousands of years of constant anger, revenge, hatred, prejudice, judging each other, war, killing each other, all the pain that it causes. Learning to love our enemy is absolutely crucial. Now, how do we do that? Because when we're hurt, the flip side of hurt is anger. You can't have a one-sided quarter. You can't have heads without tails. You can't be hurt without being angry. They go together. When I'm hurt, I'm angry. Well, when I'm hurt and feel anger, I don't feel much forgiveness, and I don't feel like I want to forgive. Then if we make it worse, because it's an ongoing hurt, every time my mother-in-law comes over to the house, she has to tell me this. She has to say that this is wrong. She has to say that this is wrong. She has to criticize this. We're not raising our kids right. We're not doing this right. She has hurt me for the last 30 years. She didn't like me. She didn't want me marrying her son. She didn't like that we moved 400 miles away on purpose. She doesn't like when she comes how I've got things arranged in the kitchen. She doesn't like how I'm raising my kids. And it's an ongoing hurt. I want to forgive my mother-in-law. But every time I'm just ready to make that act of forgiveness, she comes in with her big black brush and paints me black again and says, "You're evil." And now it starts all over again. How do I deal with that? Well, let's go back to the same process we used for learning to love ourselves. Compassion. We cannot forgive without compassion. Compassion is so difficult to put ourselves into our enemy's shoes. We can have compassion for a friend of ours who's hurting, but to have compassion for an enemy, that's a tough one. And here I'm not going to go to the scripture, I'm going to go to Longfellow. Longfellow the poet has a magnificent quote. And the first time I read it, I said, wish I'd have said that. What a wonderful statement. If we should read the secret histories of our enemies, we would find in their lives sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Listen to that again. If we should read the secret histories of our enemies, we would find in their lives sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Remember when we talked during that session on learning to love ourselves, that every one of us, no matter who it is, every one of us has had so many painful things in our life, so much pain and loneliness, misunderstandings and being left out that nobody has ever heard about. They're just things we carry, that we carry through life. And it helps us when we have compassion for ourselves to forgive ourselves. It's the same thing here. We may never be able to actually read the secret histories of our enemies. But if in our mind we can go to those and we can start to get in touch with what they might have gone through in their life, it does disarm all hostility. And that begins to lead us to forgiveness. And that begins to lead us to full love for these people. It is a lifelong journey, and it's not an easy journey. You know, Jesus gave us simple thoughts, but not easy thoughts. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. But as long as we are patient with ourselves and say it takes a lifetime. I'll go to confession now at the end. I have a terrible temper. Always have had. But when I was ordained 50 years ago, I decided we had enough crabby priests and we had enough angry priests, and we didn't need another one. And I began praying for the gift of gentleness with myself and with others. We're 50 years later. God has made a dent. I won't say he's won the battle. I'll say he's made a dent. I am much more gentle with myself. I'm much more gentle with others. As long as we learn that gentleness with ourselves, gentleness with others, and that it is a lifelong achievement. We don't get there. And when they close the lid on the casket, it might still make us mad, but it's okay. We will have made the progress. Heaven is where we learn to love all people. I have a theory, and I'll end with this, that heaven and hell might be the same place. It's just that we have to deal with everybody. And for those who've learned to love everybody, it's heaven. And for those who haven't, it's hell. Now, don't quote that theology. It's probably minor heresy, but I will say I think there's a truth in it. I think there's a truth in it. Let's keep on that journey. God will be patient with us, be patient with ourselves. Someday we'll get there. Thank you.